this landmine. The fault lines crack and the fists they fly. In the heat of the night, I touch the falling sky. It's a story as old as the flag in the yard.
Hello again. Welcome back to Tell You What, the podcast, where we talk with young songwriters about the craft of songwriting, live music performance, and assorted topics of interest. Our guests on this installment are Ellie Buckland and Molly Obomsawin, who, along with Isa Burke, make up the group Lula Wiles. The three members of Lula Wiles first met at fiddle camp in Maine when they were youngsters, and they formed the band as classmates years later at Berklee College of Music. They've recently released their second album and their first release on the revered Smithsonian Folkways label called What Will We Do? It is a great, great record. Lula Wiles have a lot going for them. Great technical skills, multi-instrumental abilities, wonderful harmonies, insightful and socially conscious songwriting. And all of these strengths are multiplied by their ability to work together and bring out the best in each other. This is a topic we've discussed with a number of our guests, and I always find it interesting, that of collaboration in the creative process. We may tend to think of creative pursuits as a solitary endeavor, but in the world of music, collaboration is everywhere. On the podcast, we have heard different permutations of this dynamic. In an earlier episode, we heard from Cordovas, who live together as a band. In our previous episode, Chris and Denny, who are partners in life as well as in the Western Den, spoke of their collaborative process. Today we hear from three friends since childhood as they talk about how their process has developed over time. It was a fun and informative discussion. So let's get to it. Here's our talk with Molly and Ellie of Lula Wiles.
With eyes shut tight and the blood washed clean, the Capitol shines, but it's a poison gleam. See the monuments fall to God's great machine. And the world it sings and the world it burns. I feel the world shaking as it turns. I feel the world shaking as it turns.
Okay, Ellie and Molly, welcome to Tell You What podcast. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us.
Thank you for having us.
In Tell You What studios, we're actually been banished from the Tell You What towers. We're in the auxiliary annex of the Megaplex, but I hope you are comfortable anyway.
Oh yeah, it's still pretty luxurious.
But thanks again for meeting with us. You're currently in the middle of a tour, right?
Yes.
It brings you through Chicago.
It's true.
Day 4
Yeah.
of a 5-week tour.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're looking at
We're
the
feeling
beginning.
fresh.
Yeah,
feeling
morale
fresh.
is still high.
And you look very fresh, I'll say that.
Thank you. I just showered. Thank you.
All right, well, I appreciate that. All right, let's get
Me
to
too.
it. Let's talk about your early years, the music in and around your lives when you were growing up. According to your origin story, at least some combination of you met at string camp. Is this
Yeah,
correct?
fiddle camp.
Fiddle camp. This is in Maine,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, for those of us who aren't from Maine, what is string camp? What happens
Yeah.
there? Is this a family thing, or is it like a kids-only situation? Or
We'll set
It's
the scene.
All of
Please.
the above. And I will say too that fiddle camps exist all over the country and really even all over the world too. Like lots of traditional music string camps. Like there's, Alistair Fraser out in California has Valley of the Moon and High Sierra Camp, and there's like the Mark O'Connor camps, right? So fiddle camp as like a concept
Yes.
in the traditional music community is when you're like, oh yeah, we're fiddle camp friends, everyone knows what you're talking about, right? But I think outside of that world, people are like, what the heck is that? Is that real? So
Right.
yeah, please set the scene.
Our fiddle camp is set in the woods of down east Maine. The tall pines abound, and the camp it's called Maine Fiddle Camp, but it has all kinds of instruments that participate in traditional roost music. and
Mostly string instruments.
mostly
then?
string,
But also
there's
penny whistle and
Okay.
accordion and there's some piano.
basically anything that you would hear in music that comes through Maine, which ends up being a lot of Quebecois, but a lot of maritime music as well, like Cape Breton,
Celtic,
Scottish,
and
Celtic,
yeah.
so lots of different stuff, and even like there's like a Maine ragtime history, which I
wow.
find
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, so there's contra dances, there's fiddle classes, there's jams, there's all that stuff, and the three of us started going to that camp at a young age, in our preteen years.
Okay.
And it was really cool as a kid because you go and you end up, like, if you're not there with your parents, right? And you ask, like, which age. And so there are kids, like, 9, 10, 11, 12, but then also, like, gaggles of teens. And then there are also people in their 20s and 30s just going to learn fiddle, or, like, with us, a lot of people that, like, started going when they were younger and then have sort of graduated to teaching or assistant teaching.
Oh, okay.
And then there are, like, the veteran Maine musicians who are, like, in their 60s, 70s, 80s who have been, like, playing in Maine trad bands forever. Like Isa, who's not podcasting with us today, but the third member of our band, her parents taught there, right?
Okay.
Her parents are, like, New England folk
Sweethearts.
Yeah, folk
Yes.
sweethearts, yes. And so that's how Isa started going, right? Because her parents were there.
So at the camp, you're learning fiddle, but are you also learning vocal techniques, other styles, song, writing,
there's
choral?
there's vocal. It's all folk music.
Okay.
So no choral music,
choral,
really.
but there are singing classes too, and
That's a
there's-
relatively new addition.
Yeah. Folks who lead singing groups and stuff, and then also around the fire at night, it's like it's a tradition, I think, across fiddle camps of the world to sing songs around the fire and late into the night and early into the morning.
Yeah, and a lot of them are, in the case of Maine Fiddle Camp, there are a lot of, like, logging songs in the
wow.
history of Maine, but then also sea shanties because it's right on the coast. And then there are, immigrants from Europe were coming, and so there's a lot of, like, you can trace a lot of the songs that are, traditional in Maine to Ireland or Scotland or,
Were your parents musicians also?
All
So
three of
all
our,
three of you had parents as
Yeah.
musicians.
So they get it. They're not. No one was like, "Wait, how will you pay your?" No one was, like, stressed that we
Well,
were
let me ask you this.
going to
Does-
be professional
Does
musicians.
this mean that from a young age you both saw life in music as a possibility?
Yeah.
Like it was always that
Yeah,
this is
and-
probably what I'm going to do because you were brought up that way?
I don't personally. This is Ellie talking, and, like, personally, I didn't. How do I say this? It wasn't like, oh, I'm just definitely going to do that. But I think at a certain point, I became aware that the idea of being a professional music was not necessarily normal to other people. Like, to me, I was just like,
Yes.
oh yeah, that could be something I do. And at least in my, like, from early childhood in my house, we were singing all the time. Like, my dad plays guitar, and so me and my 3 siblings, it would be like, especially when we were so young that we weren't in school yet, like, singing songs with our dad was just, like, a regular part of life. And, like, we had all these songs we would sing in the car and stuff, like, that I think my parents would, like, whip out when we were, like, fighting
Driving them
on, like,
crazy.
yeah, exactly, on, like, long drives. It's like, oh, let's sing all these like, rounds and things, and so, but I was just, like, so stoked on music from a really young age, and, like, started playing the fiddle when I was 5. I do remember a moment where I was, like, really stressed about what I was going to do in college, and I remember, like, meeting my best friend in the art room, and I had this, what felt like an epiphany, but now I'm just like, well, yeah, duh, where I was just like, Abby, who's my best friend, I'm like, I should just go to music school. Like,
There it is.
wow, and I think Maine Fiddle Camp, I'll sort of wrap up my answer, but Maine Fiddle Camp, when we were really all into, like, Joy Kills Sorrow and Crooked Still and lots of these, like, progressive neo-trad bands at the time that were like young and cool but playing folk music. Like I saw myself in them, like in Sarah Jarosz, and I was really into Alison Krauss. Like I saw these artists and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I was like 15, 16.
Well, did you always see the life of a professional musician as the path for you?
Yeah, not always. I grew up and my dad's a musician, and so I did grow up going to his like cool bar gigs that I would always sit in the audience and be like, Dad's so cool up there, you know? But my mom's side of the family is pretty intellectual and like academic, I guess. So that was always, it always appeared as an option to me too. And my mom's side of the family really always accentuated the importance of that kind of education. So it was sort of, and whereas my dad didn't go to music school or anything, he was just like a lifetime musician, played with his dad, like the old style way. So it was pretty half and half, and I think that is reflected by what I ended up doing, which is going to Berklee for a year and then going to Dartmouth for 4 years.
Right.
But I did definitely see myself doing music, and at a certain point just sort of decided, like, yeah, that is what I actually want to do.
Totally.
And I didn't grow up exclusively like seeing myself as a trad musician, because the upright bass is sort of has a larger territory, I think, than just trad music. And my dad played a lot of jazz and blues, so
As opposed to a fiddle.
yeah, a fiddle.
Yeah.
Right. And fiddles can do more than that, you know, but especially going to fiddle camp, you were like, oh, the fiddle means
This is
this.
what we do.
Yeah, totally.
So, at what point did you start writing music?
Well, I didn't start writing songs until I think I was 19.
Okay.
And I wasn't writing tunes either. What's interesting is like what Molly just said made me think of the fact that, you know, I was just talking about all my like musical inspiration in the context of like, oh yeah, fiddle camp or like these trad bands, but also like we've talked about this before in the band, like my dad, like we listened to a lot of like Bonnie Raitt and a lot of like sort of like female, more like pop stuff. Like I was really into Michelle Branch. So there was this other part of my like dream of a musician where I could like also see myself sort of as
Being
like a
a
pop
songwriter,
rock
right,
singer or something.
singer-songwriter, yeah.
Right? But then the like more what I was into and like much more of a day-to-day thing was like playing the fiddle, right? But I never felt like the fiddle as the way I could fully express myself musically. I always felt like there was something sort of missing, and like I didn't even you fully understand that or conceptualize it until I was introduced to people and peers in my first year of college at Berklee who were writing songs, and I went to this music camp called Miles of Music Camp, where the whole point was like the combination of creativity in writing your own music and also how that fits into like coming from a traditional world. Or there were a lot of, you know, there were folks from like LA and Nashville who were like, oh, I've always just written like rock or pop music, but like how, whoa, all these trad musicians.
In the traditional world,
there
are people who have spent their whole careers playing the traditional
Yeah.
songs without ever
Yeah,
writing
exactly.
material, right?
And that's
And there's
like,
also-
so legitimate.
There's also folks who write in the style of traditional music and like add to, especially in Maine, I think we got a lot of exposure to that, like folks who are writing sort of New England traditional music
Yes.
in the current moment.
Yeah,
right?
I think that something
Yeah.
is also often forgotten is like Celtic music, Scottish music, really like even and American old time music, like blues, all of these like root styles, they're living traditions.
Yes.
Right? There are actively Scottish musicians writing new fiddle tunes, and that doesn't mean they're like like that's traditional music. I think. You know, like sue me or something.
Yeah, totally.
But specifically with the
like someone wrote those traditional tunes.
at some point, right?
Yes.
You know, even if now they're just like anonymous
They
or
weren't found on a stone tablet.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And if they
What
were,
was?
somebody wrote that down too.
yeah.
Exactly. But specifically with like the writing of songs, like I had this sort of like eye-opening experience of realizing like, oh wait, if I just want to be a songwriter, like there's
Nothing stopping you.
I can just literally write a song, right?
Yes.
Like I don't have to like go through some like weird process. And I'll cite my friend Maya Devitri, who used to be in this band called the Stray Birds and is now doing a solo she's working as a solo artist, and she was really encouraging. You know, she was just like, oh yeah, like you like Brandi Carlile, you like, you know, like Patty Griffin, and you like Bonnie Raitt, like, you know, and I saw her writing songs. Like, I was always over at her house, and like she'd be like, oh yeah, I just worked on this new song, and I was seeing that in a way that all of a sudden, you know, or I was seeing writing songs as a thing that I could do all of a sudden, and so that's when I started writing songs, and that's when it all, for me, fell into place.
That
of
was
like,
the missing
oh
piece.
my gosh, like I didn't even know that like fiddle was only like 75, was filling 75% of this like space in me artistically, and then as soon as I wrote songs, I was like, oh well, this is 110%. Like
go.
Fuck the fiddle, no offense.
As long as you're giving it that
like,
110%. That's
I
all
don't know
can
it,
ask of you.
and it like to write songs like just like feels so good and like fills me up like on a spiritual level, I think, and especially always being a singer, right? Like my parents have always been like, oh yeah, like you were singing before you could even talk, you know?
Right.
And so singing has always been like a full expression, I think, of myself, right? And so being able to connect that to the thoughts and feelings I have and then make it into a song was just like, it blew my mind, you know? Anyway, that's enough
Molly,
about
do you
me.
remember when you started writing your own music?
Yeah, I used to, and when I was in high school, I got really obsessed with poetry.
Okay.
And so I always sort of saw myself as being a writer in that sense. And then in the middle of high school, I started getting involved in jazz. I went to this jazz camp that was sort of focused on avant-garde, like post-bop jazz, which is really a rare thing for like high school students to be exposed to. Like,
Nice.
It wasn't like learning the blues for 9th through 12th. You know, it was like, okay, we're like digging into Ornette Coleman and Don Cherry, and welcome 15-year-olds, you know. And so
Get hip now.
yeah, exactly. And so I was inspired by that and saw really clear connections between that era of creative music and creative writing. And so I saw myself as like sort of entering the combination of writing and music through that lens, through that little window.
Yes.
And I was involved in this group, this like creative group called Amplified Cactus Salon with some of my friends from Portland, Maine.
My God.
And Brooklyn. And it was basically sort of a game of artistic telephone, creative telephone, where someone would make an art piece and whatever their medium was, whether it was like writing or saxophone or cooking, there were like future chefs involved. Wow. And they would send, in this email thread, they would send their piece, and then the next person would have to do an interpretation or a response to that in whatever their medium was.
That's so cool.
And so that's when I first started like really thinking about words and music as
This
something
is
that
high
can,
school still.
in high school, yeah, as something that can like bounce off each other and inform one another, and never even thought once about writing songs.
Okay.
Sort of, because I didn't sing really at all until Lula Wiles made me a singer. Yeah.
We dragged her across the line.
Seems to be working out.
Yeah.
Oh man, so good.
Yeah. But so it wasn't, that was sort of my trajectory into words and music being in the same creative realm for me personally. And then I also went to the Miles of Music songwriting and traditional music camp that Ellie referenced.
Yes.
And so my first year of Berklee, I started sort of trying to put words into songs in a melodic way. And I did.
Did you feel as though you were, at that point, writing poetry that you were saying to music, or was it a different
It was
approach
totally different, and I still don't feel like I can write poetry and set it to music. That's something that I'm working on. But I think just because it's never been a cohesive thing, like poetry and lyrics I never approached it from a, like, I guess an intentionally cohesive direction, angle. I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. So no, it's kind of still a mystery to me how to write songs, even though I'm doing it.
That's the beauty of it,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about how the three of you collaborate in the writing process. Can you talk a bit about, I'm sure there's not any one way that the songs come about, but maybe about some of the ways that you have collaborated in writing songs.
Yeah. So at first we would just write on our own and eventually bring it to the band and arrange it. And it was like mostly a really individual process, or with like a certain lyric or something would be like, hey guys, like, what do you think about this? I'm not satisfied. You know, just like really specific.
Like somebody would just be like, okay, these 3 lines, here you go.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was really clearly delineated as like, oh yeah, this is on our first record, right? It's like, this is written by Molly, this is written by Ellie, and there's very little collaboration. And yeah, and so that's how it was for a long time, like at the beginning of our band. And I think one thing that I've thought about recently is that I feel like it had to do with the fact that at that time we all were, I mean, maybe not as confident in our own voices as writers. Like, I think there was like kind of a sense of privacy there, like this ability of like, okay, well, I'm just gonna write this song, and any of that vulnerability that I'm feeling about it, like, it's gonna be over here in my bedroom alone with myself, and then once I feel good about it, I'll bring it to the band, right?
And I think
Do you agree?
I agree, yeah. And I think over time we've all grown to trust each other more with all our vulnerabilities and being like, well, maybe these feelings are stupid and all the words that I use to try to describe them are stupid. But now we're like, that's okay. Let's just share it anyway.
Yeah.
Because, it's an exercise in friendship building.
I think that one of the things that's hard about writing songs, at least personally, when you're writing them on your own, is that you run up against your ego all the time, right? You're like constantly like telling, it's so hard to shut off the part of you that is the critical part of you, the editor, right? I had a songwriting mentor that just talked about, like the creator versus the editor, right? And like, you just have to turn off your editor.
And I think as a
produce the thing, right?
As a group of 3, it's so much easier to say like yes and, you know, the old improv practice.
Yeah,
it's just
like allow the other person to be the editor instead.
Exactly. But just to sort of keep that energy going, and yes and then after you have a full version, you go back and whoever wants to, like, it's so much easier to get to that first draft with 3 people being like, yes, this is good.
And in terms of the like, yes, this is good, but that concept of the ego, right? It's like when you are with 3 other people, just the stakes seem lower. Like when you're with yourself, there's this thing of like, just that if you come up with an idea that your editor or your like the part of you that's like, you're the worst, the inner like inadequacy complex, right? Like, welcome to my neuroses, you know, but like that person or like that voice is saying like, oh God, you can't write this song, you're never gonna write a good song again. Like, this is so dumb.
I can't believe you said that.
It builds and builds and builds, and then you just feel like utter shit. With the other gals, like that part, at least for me, goes away, because it's just like, oh, I can just have this idea, and like, if it's not good, they're not gonna hate me, and also they'll just come up with something. Like, we'll just come up with something better.
That's great.
Also, I feel like a mediocre idea is often a piggyback for
a seed for a good idea.
Okay, it's like, okay, well, hold that constant and go from there. You know?
Well, that's mediocre. Let's see what we can do. Yeah. But on your own, you might have the mediocre idea and be like, I quit today. Like, I am not writing a song today. You know?
Let's talk about, you both spent time at Berklee, and now I assume that you did possibly some academic work in songwriting, like 2 classes. So we had Denny and Chris from the Western Den on an episode last month, and we talked about this a little bit, about the academic approach to songwriting, like what you can learn and what is taught in a classroom setting at a school like Berklee. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, what you can learn in that environment, or what is taught, and maybe what you can't?
So I was in the songwriting program, like major, for a while, and I didn't graduate Berklee, but I really loved it. In a lot of ways, I loved there were lame things about it, which I'll say, but what I did love was the conscious way and like really detailed way that in those classes and with your professors and with the students, there was like there was value put on dissecting the craft of songwriting, because personally one of my frustrations I have is like when somebody's like, oh yes, this song just came to me, and then they're like, play the song, and I'm like, but that is just a bad song. Like, I'm sorry, but like, cool, that song came to you, but like, I think that in so many ways, really good songwriters have worked at what they're doing. Yes. And I feel like there's like, in some ways, can be a disrespect for the work that goes into good songs if someone is just critical of like, why are you learning that in college? Like, that can't be learned. I don't know, I feel like maybe I'm going to put my foot in my mouth, but I think that there's something to be said on both sides, right? Like, I think what you can't learn at Berklee is like maybe just to like have emotion and like be writing a song for like the trueness of the feeling and the desire to connect with people, right? Like, I think that there are people at Berklee who are just writing songs like for the money or something, right? Like to immediately move to Nashville or LA.
Vocational school in that sense, right?
Yes. And so maybe what you can't learn in those classes is like
the truth.
How to like right. You can learn the 3 chords, but you can't learn the truth, right? But
so you're saying the discipline, maybe.
This discipline and
is what you can learn.
What you can learn, and I've found that to be so helpful. When I was talking before of like the voice in my head saying like, well, you're the worst, you know, you're never going to write a good song. I don't think I would maybe have come to this as easily without Berklee, but like the fact that I'm like, well, maybe I feel this way, but I am going to keep working on this song for another hour. Like, and I am going to come back to it tomorrow. And what I'll say, and then I think Molly wants to say something, but like what I'll say about what I did learn at Berklee is like the ability to like figure out what the tools are, right? So it's like, okay, when I look at this Paul Simon song, or when I look at this, like John Prine song, or I'm having a hard time coming up with great examples, but you're like, oh, they used this chord in this moment, and these are the lyrics that go with that chord, and that created a kind of emotion that you wouldn't have with a different chord, right? Like, so the concept of like really connecting your lyrical and your chord and your the song structure, thinking really, really detailed about rhyme scheme, like being able, the concept of like rhyme scheme being something that would create movement in your song more than just, not more, but like along with the structure or the chord progression, but like that, you know, being creative with your rhyme scheme can like put spotlights on different things in your lyrics, right? So I really loved that like nerdy stuff.
Yes.
But as far as the like sitting down to write every day and like the desire to write that eats away at you, and basically like if you don't do it, like I feel like the worst person ever, right? Like that I didn't learn at Berklee. That's I think just because I feel like drawn to be a writer.
Yes.
That was meandering. What did Molly have to say?
I'm good. I don't have anything to say.
It was a good meander. I'll accept it. So let's talk about the new album. What Will We Do? Woo-hoo. I think it's fabulous, by the way. I've really been enjoying it. When I looked up the credits, I see you three, Lula Wiles produced the album with Dan Cardinal. That's right? Who, by the way, did a great job with the Western Den album, I believe, too.
He is.
Can you talk about working with a producer, and also I assume it was important to you all to be producers as well. So how did that work, and what were your feelings about that?
Last time we technically co-produced, but I think we did cede a lot of our control to our producer on the first album. Mostly, in my opinion, because we weren't really confident in our skills as stepping in as producer of our own music,
and we were really inexperienced in the studio.
Really inexperienced in the studio, yeah, and just like wanted another set of ears and opinions on our music,
and somebody to sort of drive the bus a little bit to help us along that.
Exactly, but this time I think we were a lot more confident and sort of wanted to take the bull by the horns and be like, okay, like these are all new songs to us, first of all, because we wrote them within 6 or 8 months of recording them. We set the recording date, and then we're like, okay, I guess we need songs. We were definitely, at least I remember being hesitant we like sort of thought about a bunch of different people, and I remember being hesitant to like give someone else who has a really definitive style or sound aesthetic of production the control over the songs that we wrote, because I was like, well, you don't know our sound any better than we do. And in fact, we probably know our sound and what we want, what kind of, I don't know, soundscape or something we want for this album better than anyone just walking off the street that we might not even have a real relationship with. And I think,
But maybe we like the records that they've produced or something, right?
Right.
Yes.
Because I think we wanted to be able to really have agency in the studio and with decisions of arrangement, but also production and the way it was recorded and like the whole flow.
But I think overall we're just so pumped that we did the album like ourselves. We played all the instruments except for a Moog track that
No synth skills?
Yeah, no, it was just all us, and Isa whipped out her banjo skills, unearthed her banjo
And then-
capacities.
So all us except, and then Sean, our drummer, right?
Right.
We
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
play. We don't play drums.
Yes. Well, Isa does play drums, but
Right. Not in Lula Wiles.
Isa and I have a great.
By the way, Isa is smiling from the other room. She is currently protecting her voice.
She
Her
has
throat tonight.
some laryngitis
She
in
looks
his head.
fabulous, but she's not allowed to say anything. So
Yeah.
she's here in spirit.
You might have her. You might hear her like cough every so often in the background.
Is that an
Well,
answer?
yeah, and but specifically Dan, we wanted to work with Dan.
Right.
In the end, we decided to work with him because, well, he is in Boston. He is the owner and primary engineer at the studio Dimension Sound Studios in Jamaica Plain, which is a area of Boston, and that's where the Western Den made their record.
Right.
Darling Side has made a lot of records there. The Ballroom Thieves, Bruce Molsky, Joe Walsh, and Dan has worked with like Josh Ritter on the road, and is just like a prolific sound guy.
Right.
So he really intimately knows sort of acoustic music from an engineering perspective, but then also has a lot of experience with folks sort of going beyond that. Maybe
Right.
folks who started there and went beyond, or
More
just like
indie,
indie musicians. So I think his sensibilities and where we were at the time of recording in terms of like positioning ourselves between indie and folk or whatever we are, it was a good match.
Yeah, and I think we were able to sit down with him before making the record and be like, this is the record we want to make. Like, we have really clear ideas, right? We want it to sound organic. We want it not to be too polished. We don't and we had examples of records that we felt like, I mean, these are great, but they're too polished, right? And even some that like he had done, like
Right.
he had worked on. We were like, hey,
Yeah.
this thing, it's like great, but that's not the vibe. But this thing you've done, we really like that. Or, and then we had our
So he
like
bought
vibe.
in from the start.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he was so
On board.
with like, yes, let's collaborate as a foursome to make a record that
Right.
we're really proud of.
Well,
So that was fabulous.
it worked out very well.
I think so.
I have to compliment you on the ability you have on this record to write about some difficult topics. I'm talking about specifically about songs like Hometown and Morphine. I think this takes very deft touch to be able to write as kind of the empathetic observer, narrator, without sounding, let's say, trite. Can you talk about that process, about writing about these topics in that way?
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned those two because I feel as though they're quite related. And I
Totally.
think that you and I, Molly, had many conversations, like a few conversations about those two songs and kind of how they relate, just in that the process that we both went through to write them, we ended up doing a lot of...
So you wrote...
I primarily wrote Hometown.
and Molly
and I
primarily
wrote
Morphine.
Okay.
And on it's the songwriting credit on Hometown is actually all three of us plus my sister Abby.
Okay.
But the whole song was mine, but then all of them contributed various lyrical concepts, and
Okay.
so it felt way better to have it be a co-write, and it was collaborative. Yeah.
But in terms of like conceptual collaboration, like I remember specifically having conversations about Hometown when we were on our writing retreat and being like, how do I convey, for instance, convey the disagreements that happen between individuals about politics in rural America where the political landscape is so complex.
Right.
And there's a lot of ideology and just like really firm beliefs that people take very personally, right? And like why things are the way that they are for rural people and depending on your rural situation, right? And I remember talking about this and just how much emotion is behind it and how easy it would be to misstep in writing about it. And I remember our discussion going to the place of like, well, we don't have to talk about these individuals and like who's right and who's wrong, but the system overall, like sort of scaling back, zooming out on the whole context that that this conversation, this disagreement is happening in, and being like, we can write really concretely and objectively about the system that creates these disagreements.
Yeah,
right?
and this is about hometown specifically, and
Yes.
I
don't want to oversimplify it, but you're talking about showing the situation rather than telling about it.
Or showing it rather than saying like this is what is like you're wrong. Telling
and
someone
removing the
how to feel
individual.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the way I had that song structured at that point was like a lot of the like it felt like vignettes, right? Like it was like, okay, here's the verse about a brother and the sister and like addicted to drugs and the and then she's like having the baby that also is then addicted and like the idea of like a working class mother but then also just the like pictures in Yankee Magazine and Down East Magazine of like small town life, vacation land life, right? And you're like, that's a $1 million home. Like nobody lives no one lives like that. Those are people that live on the coast, like that have billions of dollars. It's like that's not what
that's
actually
where the Bush family lives.
Yeah, like that's not actually rural life. That's not the whole picture of rural life, right? And but I was really struggling with like how to put that all together, and specifically I was like, I don't want like I'll say this, I think also because it's unlikely that he'll listen to it, and also I feel fine talking about this, but like a lot of the inspiration for that song was from my brother, right? Like we disagree fundamentally on most things, but I still love him, right? And he loves me, right? And we support each other and we wish well for each other, but it's really hard to like have a family member who and he lives in Maine and he drives a truck and he like does his life in rural Maine, and so I was like, I want somebody who somebody like my brother to listen to this song and not feel alienated and not feel as though I am attacking them, right? And I was really struggling with how to do that and that's exactly what I think you're saying of like how to sing about it deftly and without it being trite or preachy.
So you had a listener in mind.
Where I'm like, I want Kyle to be able to listen to this and like other people in my family who who we disagree, but we love each other, right? Like that I want them to be able to listen to it and say like, yes, this is actually how it is in rural. I mean, in our case, we're talking about rural Maine, but we think it's true in most of the rural places across the country. Right. This could be true. This like our whole goal was to write something that would be empathetic and not preachy.
Well, it worked.
You and your brother, you don't get along. The trouble's got nothing on the blood in the veins. You don't really recognize his face anymore, but neither does he, so you got nothing to say. Uncle Henry's selling everything. Back road dirt deals cranking away. Your sister shines bright with a crystal hue, pumping through the blood of her newborn baby.
We can come back to some of the more socially conscious songs in a minute, but let's lighten it up for a second. I want to talk about the song Nashville Man. One of my favorites on the record.
Nice.
It has kind of a Nashville sound musically to it, I think, and a kind of a traditional country theme about the woman who's waiting for someone who is probably not coming back. But
Or maybe never came around in the
maybe,
first place.
but the vocal delivery is strong, I think.
that's
So
hilarious.
it's kind of it's kind of a counterpoint, I think, to the what is being sung about. So Molly, I think you wrote this.
Yes,
Maybe you can
I
talk
did.
about this song a little bit.
It's funny, I never really have that much to say about this song, other than it's almost 100% true, and it blows to be ghosted by a man. And I wanted to write, I can't, I'm incapable of writing love songs, so I, maybe because I have such contempt for my own feelings, so...
Isa is cackling over there.
She couldn't stay silent. She had to laugh.
So I wrote a song sort of depicting how I was feeling about my feelings, which was, I was just sort of making fun of myself for feeling so pitiful about just, wanting this man to have feelings for me, and it being clear that he did not.
Yeah, and I actually do remember...
Well, I kind of get that. That's what I mean about the
that.
counterpoint, because the way it's delivered is kind of set up differently from the words themselves. So you kind of get that. It's kind of a little bit of self-deprecation.
Right. Yes. In the
tongue-in-cheek
vocal performance,
yes.
you're saying.
Yes.
Interesting.
But I think also the combination of the like sort of on its own, the lyrics could be like really earnest, right? Of like, what could be better than the two of us together? There, if you look at the like, what is the meaning of that? It's like, oh yeah, that's so earnest and heartfelt, and yet it's delivered not just in your vocal delivery, but like the song form and the way the song sounds is like much more lighthearted, right? So it is this great dichotomy there.
I think it's great.
I'm pounding the pavement, waiting on a stationary letter from a Nashville man. It's the waiting that I'm running from as fast as I can. I'm pounding the pavement, waiting on a stationary letter from a Nashville man. And I'm losing all hope in the U.S. Post. I'm a Nashville man. I'm losing all hope, but I've waited as long as I can.
Okay, so let's talk about the song Love's Gone Wrong. This brings me back to something I want to ask about the album and your collaborative process, because this song starts out as kind of a up-tempo folk song, but then at the end it kind of changes into this beautiful choral part. So how does that happen in the writing / recording process? At what point because those vocals are like part of the song to me, right? So when you're writing the song as one person, how are you thinking about how those voices are going to be part of the song, if you understand my question?
Totally.
So that one was a three-way co-write.
Okay.
Not from the beginning necessarily. Ellie wrote a verse and a chorus, and then it started becoming a co-write. And Isa came up with the outro.
Right. The outro, that's what I was saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So. Yeah, and it that song is interesting because it happened in like two chunks, and they were very far apart from each other. Like I started writing that song before, like, the first record even came out. Like I had played it for the band, just this one verse and a version of that chorus, like while we were in the studio for record 1, but it wasn't done. And then the three of us all got together, finished the first verse, and like finished the chorus. And then like months went by, like if not a year, and then Isa and I were like, okay, we need to finish this song for the album. We really want it on the album. So we sat down and wrote the second verse together. And as far as like the arrangement in terms of, I love this question about like how much does the vocal arrangement come into the writing, basically. Right. And we realized, we were like, okay, this is going to be... We realized pretty early on that we were like, we want this to be kind of a duet style vocal, right? Like, and the 3-part will happen like for a lot of it, right? But then the idea for that outro, we specifically were like, we want to write something where it like changes tempo and potentially changes key, and then just feels like really, really different. And we brainstormed a lot about like, well, okay, what will be the thing that kind of like sort of sums up the song, right? Like this, and Isa came up with "There's Never Gonna Be a Right Time," and it was just in like the early stages of brainstorming. And I think we like tried to come up with something better, but we were just like, no, that is the best. That's great. And so
it's kind of like a bridge kind of lyric.
Yes.
Well, we call it the broutro.
Okay.
Because
outro.
The bridge outro.
Right.
And as in, like, because a bridge of the song, like, super new music, and it's like a new concept, right? Yes. But when we were writing it, we kind of worked on this, like, basically it's like it changes keys, but it's the same chord progression as the verse in the original key.
Okay.
Like the
You already lost me, but
yeah, whatever.
I don't know what
And
you're
I don't know.
talking about. Some of our listeners will understand.
I lost me too. Don't worry. And but as Isa and I were arranging it, we were sort of like, okay, how can we extend? We wanted to extend the chord progression in a way that would like set the vocal slightly different each time, and that ended up getting worked out in the studio. Like there were a lot of different ideas. Like I think Dan was wanting us to do it even more times, or like sort of having an overlap thing in the vocals. But what we feel like ended up the best was just this like slow build.
Yeah.
And Isa and I were, when we were writing it, just the two of us with like our guitars, we were hearing that as 3-part harmony. We were like, this will just be like, we knew it would be like epic, right? Because it's going to slow down and then this vocal thing. So we were thinking about the vocal arrangement while we were writing it. Yeah.
Red button on the sleeve of my dress. Good God, I'm making a mess. I've been doing you wrong to let it go on so long. What you got left when the flicker dies out? Tell me what we're gonna do now that all of our love's gone. Now that all of our love's gone. There's never gonna be a right time. There's never gonna be a right time.
The last cut, What Will We Do? Based on a traditional song, right?
Well,
Irish.
it is a traditional song,
but you
and
reinterpreted. Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
How that
we wrote
came about?
Yeah. So it was Isa's idea to bring this song to the band, and it's one that we had heard friends of ours do, and it's originally sourced to Mary Delaney, an Irish ballad singer, and we were really drawn to it because we feel like it really sums up exactly the question that was on everyone's lips and perhaps still is at the time that we wrote it in 2017. Wrote the album, and
What will we do, etc.
exactly. You know, just definitely a window into a period of time of just sort of turmoil and questioning. And we were really drawn to the verses, and they seemed just very sort of descriptive and apt for, a timeless question of like, what will we do if we have no money? People have been feeling that way for millennia.
Yes.
And one verse that was that we decided to take out was about what will we do if we marry a soldier. And we decided we just didn't want to be singing about armies, regardless of the original intention or message of that verse. We just decided we don't really need a verse about a soldier in here. So,
Though I have learned since that that verse is actually a sexual euphemism.
yeah.
Interesting.
But anyway, so we didn't sing it, and we don't have to deal with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though we maybe wouldn't be opposed to that.
Yeah. We decided to do something equally cheeky by writing a verse about socialism.
Yeah.
Essentially. Responsible economic policies begin at home is the joke that Isa likes to make.
But yeah, so it is just like the melody and the lyrics are all the traditional thing. It's just we added our own lyrics.
What will we do if we marry a banker? Oh, true lovers, what will we do then? Only take all we can, share the money, cross the land, and we'll yodel it over again.
this brings me to a bigger picture question. You talk about generally, if there is a way to do this, the traditions that you grew up in, and where you see your place in that tradition, kind of what threads you think you're continuing. Are you breaking threads, or particularly when we talk about the socially conscious parts of your writing, do you feel like you're carrying on a tradition, or are you using the traditional styles to go to different places?
That's a really hard question, but
I
a
think
good
both,
question. Yeah,
honestly, is my answer to that, because I think folk music has always been socially conscious and sort of documenting of social situations and social isolation and poverty and racial contexts.
And people singing like, well, I have this hard time and my life is really hard, and I'm using writing music that then becomes, folk canon, like to get through that, right? Like the experience of singing music with other people to get through hard times, but then it becomes, this documentation of that time.
Yeah.
So in what way do you think you're taking it to new places?
Right.
Well, I've thought about this a lot because I've been in a lot of conversations that are increasing at folk and fiddle camps, I will say, in the defense of the trad world. Conversations about race and Black heritage in folk music, and sort of problematic lyrics that have somehow persevered through time.
Right.
It's not a mystery. American society is still racist, and that's why, right? Even if subliminally. But I think in a lot of ways, especially with songs like Good Old American Values, not to self-call too much, but right.
We were going to get to that.
Nice.
So let's go there.
I was really moved to take folk music and even reclaim tropes about Native people. I'm Native, this is Molly speaking. Okay. And tropes about Native people that are so prevalent in folk music and songwriting, and sort of flip them over and be like, listen to this instead. This is an anti-colonial waltz that sort of is in the style of a cowboy song.
Right, and so his whole thing of are you carrying on the thread, or are you breaking the thread, right? Like
both.
It's so amazing. Yeah, I think it's so amazing
song
how
in
you did
particular,
that.
I think it's really well done, because, like you just said, it is in waltz time. I didn't go to Berklee, but I think I picked that up.
Nice.
And the production is kind of scratchy, old-timey, as though someone were playing it on an old phonograph. Yeah. And
we use this vintage guitar, and
right. Yeah, I think you mentioned last conversation we had, it maybe was your grandfather's guitar or something like that. Yet the lyrics kind of flip everything on its head.
Exactly. And I think and that was completely intentional. And I think even in arrangements and rewrites like What Will We Do, we're taking an original and sort of timeless concept of poverty and sort of grappling with reality for whoever the singer is, and we added a new verse that is very particular to right now. It's about the bankers, we have to look at the big banks and flip that over, right? And that is just very specific context for now in the midst of a timeless traditional ballad.
Right. And like, what will we do if we have a young daughter? Like, I think that one of the other themes on this record, in that we're all three women, but like I think that there are themes of like how, like, what does it mean to be a woman right now? Like, we're grappling with that in terms of our own, like, our heartbreaks, or like, just how we fit as women, I think, in the world. And so there's like that verse, right? What will we do if we have a young daughter is also timeless, right?
Right.
And I think that Good Old American Value, going back to that, like Good Old American Values, like I'm just in such awe of that song. I think specifically because of what you guys are just saying, like the way that it somehow like is so in the canon of
cowboy songs,
cowboy country music, and is so roasting and critical of country music. And I just think it's like it's incredible, and
it's almost a trick.
Good old American value. sweet sweat on their brow. That's some good old American values. Good old American cartoons. Indians and cowboys and saloons. It's all history by now, and we hold the pen anyhow. Drawing good old American cartoons.
I think we can leave it there. This has been a great discussion. I've learned a few things. I'm looking forward to a show tonight that I'm going to see in Chicago. I'm excited. I hope Isa's resting of her voice works. I'm sure it will.
Yep.
So thanks very much. Good luck on
You're
the rest of
welcome.
the tour.
Much, Michael.
Mike, this was so fun. Tell you what.
Tell you what.
What will we do if we have no money? Oh, true lovers, what will we do then? Only haul through the town for a Hungary crown, and we'll yodel it over again.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed our talk with Molly and Ellie. Be sure to check out What Will We Do, Lula Wiles' great new record. They're currently on tour supporting the album, so look out for a live show as well. I've seen them perform a few times, and they've completely won the crowd over every time. Stay tuned for more episodes of Tell You What. I've just returned from a week in Austin at the South by Southwest Music Conference. I saw a lot of great new music and chatted with a few artists about the podcast, so I'm excited about some upcoming episodes. Until then, remember, music is the best.
What will we do if we have no money? Oh, true lovers, what will we